Hello, my name is Catherine Moore, social worker, mom, coffee lover, and founder of Social Workers Rise, where we inspire social workers to connect, expand their knowledge, and change more lives than they ever thought possible. I'm so excited you found my podcast. We will talk everything social work on every level from micro to macro. We will hear the stories of social workers who are doing big things, learn new skills, and most importantly, give you actionable steps to make a difference today. Let's go. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Social Workers Rise. It is your host, Catherine here. This week, we're sitting down with Laurie Eldred. She is a LMSW-Clinical out of Michigan. And this conversation is really important because we all need to know how to interview, but we're rarely ever taught this. You have to purposely seek out this specific type of training, or you can learn the long and hard way and just go on a bunch of interviews and fail. So we don't want that for you. We don't want the latter, right? This is going to be one of those preventative or even brush up on your skills. If you have happened to gone to a bunch of interviews and failed, we're going to talk with Laurie, and she's going to give us 5 ways that we can show up to our interview with confidence, which confidence is very important, as in it presenting yourself in general, because if you're showing up to an interview unconfident, is that a word? I don't know, not confident in your skills, then that's going to put doubts in the minds of the interviewers. So Laurie does this all the time. She is interviewing social workers for community mental health all the time. So she really has great insight into what interviewers are looking for and how we need to show up and present ourselves and prepare for the interview. Yes, interviews take a lot of preparation, my friends, but it is worth it. I promise you. So she's going to give us 5 tips on really just how to do that efficiently and confidently. And I'm really excited for you to listen in, because if you have been in an interview and it's completely bombing, it is a terrible feeling, terrible. So we want to prevent that from ever happening to you or ever happening again. So we're going to take a short break, listen to this ad from our sponsor, the Rise Directory, and then we're going to hop right into our conversation with Laurie Eldred. This episode is proudly brought to you by the Rise Directory, a national directory of clinical supervisors who are dedicated to helping the next generation of clinical social workers grow in their clinical skills. The link is in the show notes. Check it out and tell every clinical supervisor you know about this directory. Hello, Laurie. I am so excited to talk with you today about some interview tips for new social workers transitioning to a different job. I'm excited because this is a topic that we just can never get too much of. Mm-hmm. So thank you for being here. Can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what do you do?
Yes, thank you for having me on. My name is Laurie Eldred. I'm a social worker out of Michigan. So currently I do a couple different things, but I'm working community mental health in the county I live in. And I teach a class on the side at the master's level, and then I do some private practice work. So I'm probably like typical social workers having multiple jobs and multiple things going on. So that's what I'm doing currently. And I also have a little side business called Just a Social Worker, where I sell products, gifts for social workers.
How fun. Yeah, I got your little name tag holder, and people on my Instagram said, "Oh my gosh, where do I get this from?" It's so cute.
Thank you. Yeah. So it's a little side thing.
Yeah, it's so fun. And the link is in the show notes too, if you want to check out her shop as well. So you have a little bit of everything. community mental health is a really big area, especially for new social workers. So I'm excited to get your perspective because you hire and fire people. Is that correct?
hmm Yep. Yeah, I do. So I'm a supervisor for a program called Care Management within the community mental health that I work at. So yeah, I am hiring and firing or letting people go, unfortunately.
Yeah, yeah, that has to be a really hard part of the job, I'd imagine.
It is. It is just, especially when you hire somebody and you see the potential and just all their skills, but maybe they're not a right fit or they're kind of doing some things to sabotage themselves. So that's very sad, very hard at times. Not a part of the job I enjoy at all when you're just like, I have to let you go. Like this isn't working, or trying to problem solve when people are struggling is hard because you get attached to the people that you work with.
Sure. Yeah. And I
Mhm.
imagine you hired them, so you want them to succeed.
Yeah.
Sometimes it doesn't work out that way.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's hard, it is kind of like I don't know, it's maybe a little ego thing where you're like, I hired this person. Like, I thought they were fabulous at the interview. And then it's like, oh, it's not the best fit, or maybe they didn't have the skills or kind of, didn't portray themselves in maybe the most accurate way. So maybe a little ego's in there too when you
Right.
hire them. Yeah.
So let's talk about how we ace this interview. I'm
hmm
curious to know what kind of tips you have for people who are maybe fresh out of grad school, even going into internship interviews. I know we have to do that, or just
hmm
looking to transition out of their current job into, into a new dip role, especially within community mental health. So what would you say as your top 5 tips?
Yeah. So my first tip, like first kind of right off the bat, would just be to be prepared, like to do your research. I just doing the hiring and then now teaching our class that's a master's level, and that's the students are just those students getting ready to graduate. Just be prepared. Like, I think kind of like when we do get a new case and we do like a case review and a case assessment, like just know about the agency, know about the field of work generally. If you can connect with somebody that's maybe done the work, like worked for the agency or in a similar agency, or just Google or get on the website. Just, I think knowing what the organization's like mission statement is, like what their service population is, kind of the general activities they're doing would be my number one.
Yeah, that's a good tip because I remember being asked a couple of times in different interviews, what's your understanding of this position or this
hmm
organization?
hmm
So that would definitely help with that first question.
Yeah. Yeah. And our first, usually one of the first interview questions that we ask is kind of why did you apply? Like, why did you apply for this position, or what drew you to this position? Why do you want to work for our particular agency? So that's usually like off jump. That's the first question that gets asked. So it's good to know something about the agency.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. What is tip number 2?
So tip number 2 would be to give examples. So come with examples, not just all the things that you've done right or like wonderfully that kind of wonderfully worked themselves out, but even come with like tips on things that maybe you didn't do well, things that maybe you made a mistake on or failed at, but what you learned from that. So I think that's also important because yeah, I love as a hiring manager to hear like all the wonderful things you're doing, but I also like to hear when you're made a mistake, but what you've done from it, like how you've grown, how you've learned from it, what you took away from it. For me, that's just important to see that growth and even the acknowledgement that like I made a mistake, I'm human, and I learned from it.
Yeah, because that's such an important part of being a social worker because it's impossible
Mhm.
to know everything about
Yeah. Yep.
everyone or every system. So
hmm
being humble and being able to ask for help is definitely a strength. And I've heard this as a barrier for a lot of clinical supervisors is that the social workers that are new to the job, they want to be seen as professional, as knowing
hmm
everything, but they don't, it's
hmm
just part of the job. But they don't ask for help, or they're not honest,
Yeah.
or they're not being authentic with their coworkers or with the clients or their
Yeah.
supervisor. Have you
Yeah.
seen
I
that?
think Yeah, I've seen that. And I think, those are some of the softer skills. Like, yeah, it's great if you know how to do CBT, motivational interviewing. You have that strengths-based perspective, but I also think it's good that you can roll with a mistake. You can ask for help. You can, if you don't understand something, ask questions. Yeah, because as a hiring manager, I don't expect you to know like the ins and outs of the agency, but I'm hoping that if you don't know, you ask. And that if you have a mistake, you do something wrong, that you come to me as a supervisor and say, okay, this happened. This is what I thought. This wasn't what happened, but like, what do I do next? I tend to have a lot of respect if you just don't know and you want some extra help or support, especially if you're just coming out of like a master's program. I don't think there's an expectation you should know everything and have it all nailed down just on day one.
That's good. That takes a lot of, just you saying that takes a lot of pressure off a lot of people, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I hope so. Cause I remember when I started in my first job. So, having that supervisor that was like, you're going to grow and learn, and that's okay. And you'll make mistakes, and that's okay too.
Yeah.
It's good. Mm-hmm.
And that is one of the quality traits of a good supervisor, someone who is supportive and able to help and guide you, as opposed to, on the other spectrum where they're not.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And I've definitely had those both experiences. I've had those great supervisors that I'm like, okay, I did this wrong, or I'm not sure, or I think I've got the answer, but let me problem solve it or process it with you. And then I've had those ones that I'm like, I'm not telling you anything I've ever done wrong, because I know it'll get used against you. I mean, unfortunately, we've had that. I think lots of us have had that experience.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. What would be your third tip?
So my third one would be just to bring your personality. So I know interviews, and especially when you're at this level, tend to be very professional. They tend to be, people are nervous and wanting to put your like best foot forward. But I think it's also good to have just your personality. So when I interview, I always try to throw in a fun question to get more of that like personality, just, your humor, like, how you're able to roll with things, like kind of how you see yourself, just even some of the fun, quirky things about you. I usually ask, one of my favorite questions is always like, what's your favorite cookie? And then how does that describe you as a person? And I always think that I get a lot of laughs. I think it's a fun question because people are so used to this like serious, like boom, boom, boom question. And then they get a little thrown off. And I kind of like to see how people roll with that. But it's also, I've had such amazing like responses. It's been so funny and like genuine how people answer.
Yeah, that's awesome. Because it's one of those interview questions that is not posted anywhere to prepare for.
No, no, it's not. That's why I like to like throw it in there, because I'm like, oh, this is going to be a good surprise. But it's also, I think after having all the serious questions, it kind of just eases into, do you have questions? I think it's kind of a good transition.
Yeah. What would you think of an interviewee who asked that of you when you say, oh, do you have any questions for me?
And they ask me that?
Yeah.
I would be like, heck yeah. I love cookies. So I'm like, oh, I can rattle that off the top of my head. I did actually have an interview, and this was recent. And I said, well, do you have any other questions? And he's like, well, what do you think of my shirt? And then actually I was like, that's good. And the shirt was fine. It was just really funny. Like, I liked that because that was something you don't typically get. And it did show a little bit of his personality. Just asking that kind of fun, more informal question.
Yeah, definitely. So before we get to number 4, what kind of cookie would you be? And what does that say about your personality?
Oh yeah. I would say probably a monster, like one of those monster cookies that's got like M&Ms and chocolate chips and like raisins. Cause I feel like I'm a little bit of everything. Like I have experience in a lot of areas. I like kind of multiple different things. And it's like, you get all these cool, like yummy tastes and stuff like that with it. So, and plus usually you make them pretty big. So I like big cookies.
Nice.
Yeah.
I love it.
Thanks.
All right. So we have number one, be prepared, do your research, talk to people. Number two, bring examples of the good work that you've done and also the examples of the challenges you've overcome and how you've learned and grown from those.
Mhm.
Number three is bring your personality. Don't be scared to let it shine through. Bring up some humor if you can. And what is number four?
So number four is a little bit of a tie-in to, I think, a couple of the other ones, is bringing that willingness to learn, a willingness to, if you don't know something, a willingness to understand it, figure it out, humbleness. I think some of those softer skills are so nice to see when I interview people, because I know that you're not, as a social worker, as a clinician and whatever level, you're not going to understand how to work with every single population. And so if you have that willingness to learn, to grow, to understand that population, to do the trainings, to do anything that you need to be kind of that best clinician, I love seeing that in a new candidate. I love seeing that in a new employee, because that willingness to grow just tells me that they'll be a great fit for the team, because so much stuff can be taught, but some of that other humbleness, willing to learn, to grow, are sometimes harder skills to teach and to get people to see how beneficial they can be.
Yeah, and I can see how that'd be helpful and important, because social services is always changing. There's always some new rules, some new law coming in, some new policy, that if you have those people who are very like stringent and don't like change and like, this is BS, then it's going to be hard to work with that.
Yeah.
Which I've had some colleagues, and I'm thinking to myself, like, it's really not, you just send an extra email. I don't know why it's such a big deal, but some people are like, change stresses them out so much.
Yeah. And we think about like you get a job description on a position. I mean, it's very broad. It's made very broad for a reason, just to give you an overview and then to work on the more specific stuff. And it is that, broad list of skills and actions that you'll probably be doing in the job. But there's also that specific stuff that you learn when you get into the position and into the role. And you're absolutely right. If you're in social services, like community mental health, I mean, you work at like any level, things change constantly, rules, funding requirements. If you're in a grant funded program, all that changes, funding can go away. And so there has to be a lot of that flexibility and just willing to kind of roll with it.
Yeah, definitely. Being humble, being able to show up and problem solve. Definitely.
Yep. Yeah.
Awesome. And what is your fifth tip?
So my fifth tip would be ask questions. Always, always, always come to an interview with a couple questions. If I would say 1 to 2, 2 max. I think sometimes the more the better. I think that says, to me as a hiring manager, you've done some research, you've looked at the job posting, maybe you've talked to people, done, some informal networking or connection, like you're invested, you're interested, you want to know more, you're thinking about the position, thinking about how you would fit into the position, what skills and talents you could bring. It's also a good time, like if you do have additional skills and talents that maybe didn't come out during the job interview, to talk about those too. So, I've had folks talk to me about, they had additional language skills that I wasn't able to ask about, or the question didn't prompt them to ask, or they've talked about volunteer experiences. So I think those are just really important to ask questions.
Yeah, I had one interview that I went on, and I asked, it must have been, I don't know, 3 or 4 questions that I asked her, and she responded like, "Oh my gosh, I feel like I'm being interviewed. I've never had someone be so interested in me." And I got the job. So it worked out.
See, there you go. It worked. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I've had folks ask really great questions like, what are you looking for in a team member? What is it? What are some of, I think I've even had like, what are some of the things that, I've done well in the interview, or what do you see as some of my strengths? Do you have feedback for me in areas of growth? I always appreciate too, any follow-up. So after we've done the interview, and if I've had to say no, we're going with another candidate, I've had folks ask questions even then. And I always appreciate that too, if they want feedback. Because then that's like, okay, they are invested, they're invested in the being a social worker, understanding, growing, learning. And interviews are hard because it's like the short amount of time to like sell yourself, and you don't know the person. It can be awkward, uncomfortable.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Especially, I mean, I feel like the panel interviews are the worst because there's
Mhm.
all these people just staring at you, and they can be really intimidating.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
those are
And
rough.
we do, fortunately or unfortunately, we do group interviews, but we're, because of the pandemic, doing everything virtually. So then you have this like added um, barrier of like, now I'm trying to show off my personality, but doing it virtually and trying to come across as like kind of personable, easy to get along with or engage with. But, sometimes we have technical glitches, and that's happened. Like somebody can't get their screen to come on, or they keep freezing. And so they have to turn their camera off. And so like, then there's this other extra that you're trying to add into the interview along with the panel and then selling yourself. And it's hard to do that stuff right now. The virtual interviews are hard, and but still we've had really great interviews. So I appreciate the people that show up and try.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So I love all the tips. Let's see. Do you think that when we're talking about our experiences, do you feel that personal experience should be integrated in there, or should we just keep it like strictly professional experience?
I think I would probably very closely look through the job description. So I know in our particular job description in our agency philosophy, it very much encourages lived experience, personal experience. We encourage folks with personal and lived experience to apply, um, even at that clinical, a therapist, case manager level, even management level. So the social work part of me says yes. I think that's super important. I don't think we can ever like, completely distance or like disconnect from our personal selves. I think it's just a careful walk, because some agencies very much encourage that and they will live that. I feel like our agency really lives that. Some agencies say they will live that and they don't. And unfortunately, you could get dinged for it. But I know I always appreciate lived experience, just being candid and open about it. I don't need to know all the details. I don't need to know kind of every personal thing, but just being very candid. And we've had people share in a very like appropriate way. My dad has, or I have had when I was younger, I had mental health issues or substance use issues. But, and then they'll say, I'm in recovery. These are kind of a couple of things I've done. And I always appreciate that. I have a tremendous amount of respect for people that do that, because I know as a social worker, it's not easy to share that because of that professional self-development. And so I think some messaging we get.
Right. Yeah. I know when I went on some interviews, my interviews were mostly with older adult type of settings. And I would always mention I just have a passion for older adults because I was raised by my grandmother, and they seemed to like that. But I also had to emphasize like the boundaries and the professionalism. Like I understand
Mhm.
it's not my grandmother, so I'm
Mhm.
not going to be giving
Mhm.
her a ride home if that's not allowed type thing.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, and then I was thrown off because another interview asked me, it was for a domestic violence like shelter type of thing. And they hired me because I had like a history of addiction in my family. And I was so thrown
Mhm.
off when they asked, they're like, oh, do you have any personal experience with this? And I was like, with like drugs? What is this a trick question?
Right? You're like, how much do I disclose here?
Yeah, it was just awkward to, talk
Yeah.
about my family dynamics in an interview because I was just so thrown off by it. But so
Yeah.
good point. Just be prepared for anything.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, if you're I think too, I mean, depends on a lot of it's, how you present it. I think, like I said earlier, if you're saying, hey, this was a struggle, or I have family history, or, I was in the foster care system, but, this is what I've done since then. I think to me, that gives a sense of you've done the work. on some of that. And really, we all have histories, we all have lived experience in some level. And if you, I think, can demonstrate in some way you've done some work, I think that can be beneficial if you're going to share that lived experience.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. What has been the most impressive action someone has taken or shown or demonstrated that was able to land them the job?
Oh, this is a good one. I know I saw that question. I was like, oh, this is a good one. The shirt one was good, although he didn't get the job.
Oh,
It was just a good question. It was just a great question. I would say, I hired somebody recently. She's starting on our team pretty soon. And I think what impressed me the most about her and why, and I had a couple other candidates, we had like top four, we had four people, and we really like went back and forth. And she's new BSW, doesn't have a ton of experience, but man, she was just like, I don't have a ton of experience. I do have these skills that I can transfer, but she was like, and I'm willing to learn. I'm willing to do the research. I'm willing to read. I'm willing to figure that out. I'm willing to ask questions. And she had some like technical glitches, like, because it was a virtual one, and she really rolled with it. And she's like, I'm so sorry. Had some humor about it, like showed personality. And I would say that probably has been like the one that has stood out to me the most because of that eagerness, of that like genuine, like honesty. Like, yeah, I can't say that, as a BSW, I have all of this experience. I mean, she just graduated, but, here's how I can compensate. And I think that was pretty impressive for me. I did have another person who, yeah, it turned almost like into this, her interviewing us and just asked a ton of great questions. And so that was kind of an impressive, and I had said to her, she wasn't the fit for the program, but I was like, oh, you would be such a good fit for the agency. But she was great, like was very prepared, great questions, talked personal experience, had great boundaries. So those two are the ones I think that stand out the most for me. I know it's kind of hard when you're doing virtual stuff to get super creative. I did meet people's dogs in some interviews. So somebody I had an interview with, he had a huge, like Great Dane, and oh gosh, he had another very large dog, and we got to meet him, and I was like, well, that's kind of cool. You always meet everybody's like kids and their pets when we're doing virtual stuff. So that was kind of cute.
Yeah. Awesome. So basically they hit all of your 5 points during the interview.
Right. Yeah. I'm like, you got my 5. Yeah. You get my 5, you get my vote type thing. Yeah.
Yeah. But I love these because they're so applicable to literally any setting you're going to, any interview you're going to. You should always be prepared, bring examples, show your personality, show a willingness to grow and learn and ask questions of the interviewer. So I think that it's pretty well-rounded to any setting that you're going into.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think so too. And I think it's a good attitude, even, the interview just isn't the end all be all. Like there is then, you get into the job. And so it is good to come, to be prepared, to ask questions. If you don't know something, to, if your supervisor isn't available, you have somebody you can like consult with and, show. Even with clients, I think it is super healthy if we're like, hey, this, I don't know this answer, but I will figure this out and I'll come back to you. Or, I think I might have made a mistake, in something I said or something I did, and I'm sorry. And, how can we repair that? I think some of that humility just shows that you're human, that we're not any better, any worse than the folks that we're working with. And like, we all have things that we need to work on and grow on.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much, Laurie, for your time. I love these interview tips. Is there anything else that you feel is important that we didn't cover today?
No, I think that's it. I mean, I think, there are going to be in the next couple of months, like people graduating, with their master's in social work. We have where I'm at in Michigan, we have a huge need for social workers, at the BSW and MSW level. So like, if you're, not sure if you'd be a good fit, I would still say apply, have somebody review your resume, cover letter, somebody that will give you honest like feedback. And and really just, take the risk and apply for that job if you don't think that maybe you're 100% fit, but definitely be prepared and show how like some of the skills that you have from maybe other experiences or your internship can easily translate into that position. Because I know managers, if you can make a good case, they will hire you even if you don't have a ton of experience. So definitely take the risk.
Okay. That's encouraging, because I know people
Mhm.
get discouraged when they say, oh, I don't have 1 to 3 years experience
Yeah.
yet. And so
Yeah.
don't get hung up on that part, is what you're saying.
Yeah. Yeah. And I really think, to add just one more piece is do some of that kind of informal networking, reaching out, talking to people who work in the agency or have worked maybe recently in the agency, get their feedback, like talk to a couple different people. Um, just be willing to learn and understand the agency and know the good stuff as well as the bad, because every agency has areas they need to grow into. And so know kind of what you're getting into.
Yeah, definitely. And podcast episodes like this help. I did
Mhm.
another episode on medical social work, and people said that it was really helpful before they went into the interview, because they were able to really kind of speak to the different tasks and the duties and the skills needed for that
Mhm.
particular position. So yeah, it just speaks to what you're saying about do your research in any way that you can. I'm
Mhm.
sure YouTube has a bunch of videos too with
Mhm.
social workers. So
Yeah. Well, and usually there's a ton of Facebook groups. So like that's always a great way to get information if you have a local like NESW or just a local, like we have a couple of them where I live, social work, mental health groups that you can jump into. And that's always a great place to, hey, I'm interviewing here. I'm thinking about this. Anybody work there? Anybody have experience, even if they don't work at that agency, like maybe they have medical or experience in community mental health. And, just most of us social workers like to help each other. So just ask questions and just
definitely.
get some more awareness. Yeah.
Yeah, social workers are always ready to help other people.
Mhm. Sometimes, sometimes a little too much, but we always do like to help and, give a hand up to somebody else.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much, Lori. I really, really enjoyed this conversation. I know it's super helpful for people. So I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Social Workers Rise. I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Laurie Eldred. She has a website, justasocialworker.com, where she has all of her services listed, and you can even shop for really cool social work merchandise if you're looking for a gift for yourself or a gift for a new grad or your professor. Definitely check it out. Social Workers Rise also has some merchandise, some tees and sweaters and coffee mugs. Really cute if you're looking to shop. Also, if you are feeling a little iffy on your clinical skills and you want to brush those up before you start a new job, and this is especially true if you are going for a community mental health position or a direct clinical position for the first time, or you're within a year of graduating or have graduated with your MSW, then I highly recommend checking out the Clinical Essentials for the Future Therapist course. This is going to guide you through the entire therapeutic process with clients, give you tools on how to do this confidently and effectively. It's meant to be used in conjunction with clinical supervision. So definitely check that out. The link is in the show notes, and I'll talk to you next week. Do you want to make your own podcast? Spotify has a platform that lets you make one super easily, then distribute it everywhere and even earn money all in one place for free. It's called Spotify for Podcasters. And this is the platform that I use because it makes it so simple to record and distribute your podcast all in one place using your cell phone. What you need to do is download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to www.spotify.com/podcasters to get started. Thank you for joining us on another episode of Social Workers Rise. If you loved it, please open up your iTunes, tap the 5 stars, and leave a short note on why you love listening to the Social Workers Rise podcast. Also, if you want to share it on social media, I absolutely love it. You'll have me fangirling all over you. Take a screenshot and share it and tag me at Social Workers Rise on Instagram and Facebook. Lastly, just want to leave a little bit of legal disclosure here that the information, opinions, and recommendations presented in the Social Workers Rise podcast are for general information only, and any reliance on the information provided in this podcast is done so at your own risk. This podcast should not be used in place of professional advice, therapy, or clinical supervision. And with that, my friends, I'll talk to you next week.